Hello there, Battle Cats players. My name is Chance, and welcome to what is likely to be, I'm assuming, one of my most viewed guide videos. Let me tell you, making this script has been nothing but a pain in the neck. Every time I'm relatively happy with it, I gave it an hour or so, came back to it, and was dissatisfied again. I am basically forced to run with this one because it is 2 a.m. my time, and I am hoping to get this out by noon today, which may or may not happen. I hope it will happen. Ultimately, you guys will know better than me at this point. And naturally, the second, and I mean second, I get my microphone ready, I open up Audacity, it starts raining outside, and it's coming down hard. We don't usually get rainstorms around 2 a.m. around here, but I guess we are today, so I do apologize. I do not know why Cat God must test me so, but thematically, it is raining cats and dogs, which, all jokes aside, is kind of a pain in the neck, because it means editing the audio will take even longer. Well, my personal grievances aside, let's focus on the video. Today we are talking about what is quite arguably the single most important cat in the game. The cat that will make a lot of tricky stages without it practically a breeze, and a cat that, while it claims no real glory of its own, it guides others to become legends. Kind of like a Red Skull Infinity Stone kind of conundrum, He guides others to a treasure he cannot possess himself. But as much as I would love to make Confucius-esque proverbs all day long, ultimately you're here for a reason. Today we're talking about Tank Cat. This cat is one of the normal cats, and it's the second unit you obtain, which is kind of surprising because he'll make a very long-term spot on your roster. He is unlocked after clearing Korea, which is really the first level, in Empire of Cats Chapter 1. Now, he doesn't really require anything to unlock, you just kind of get the notification that appears that he does. Now, without further ado, let's talk about it in further detail. I do have some relatively spicy thoughts on Tank Cat as a whole. If you hear me call him a racer cat throughout this video, by the way, I do humbly apologize for that. It is really just a force of habit at this point. It has been forever since I've actively talked about him as Tank Cat. That is his base form. That is what the video is going to be titled, perhaps to its own detriment. But if I call him a racer cat out of habit, I do apologize. I've done multiple takes of this script and previous ones where I end up just calling him that towards the end. I do apologize. I will try to stop the Freudian slip for as long as possible. But without further ado, let's talk about his forms. So this cute little oblong version of cat starts out as Tank Cat, whose description reads, tough, high health, area attack, strong enough to move a pebble. And that will remain a relatively constant feature of Tank Cat. His attack never really gets that high, but it doesn't matter. This will still for sure, this will be one of the most useful cats in your arsenal for really the entire early game, for sure. That is until you upgrade him to Wall Cat at level 10. Whose description reads rigid defense, now with corners, also, quote, area attack, strong enough to move a small rock, which is quite the upgrade if you ask me. This is where he kind of gets his, I guess, more recognizable rectangular shape. If you were to take a Who's That Pokemon silhouette of this cat, almost everyone would be able to recognize him right off the hop, regardless of your experience level in this game. Outside of Cat himself, this is probably the most recognizable unit in the game. And certainly anyone in the end game or mid game has carved out a place on their general team, or their general slot rather, for this cat, almost without exception. Reaching his true form at level 20 plus 10, at this point in the game, likely gotten through cat capsules, he becomes a racer cat. Hands down, one of the most recognizable units in the general slot for any mid to end game squad. And assuming you're not being uber carried naturally, and like realistically there aren't any real meta ubers I'm aware of, at least, that can do the job of tank cat or racer cat at this point. They just don't have the deployment time needed. It's really easy to get a racer cat down to that 2-second deployment time, which is as low as you can realistically get, or get at all for that matter. That's as low as battle cats will go. But there's an argument to be made that against some enemy types, especially those with knockback, I'm thinking of one nasty koala in particular, these cats are essentially meaningless, and there are a couple stages where rushing takes priority, so it won't always be on your team, but it should almost always be at least on your general slot to one degree or another. And we will talk about that a little bit more in a bit here. Now that we've discussed his forms, let's take a quick look at his performance. So, first and foremost, if you haven't been able to tell already, Tank Cat is considered to be a meat shield, much like Cat. Only unlike Cat, this is really what Tank Cat is good at. And by good at, I mean out of the kind of non-gacha units, Tank Cat and his Crazed counterpart, who we will hopefully talk about at some point in time, are arguably the best at that role. Once again, I'm just spitballing off the top of my head, but in terms of raw meat shields, for most stages they are the best. The only exception really takes place when they start getting one shot, at which point you're better off just using Cat. We discussed that in the Cat video along with a couple other things. But for the most part, meat shields are units with very low cost and minimal recharge time, even more preferably with the survivability and or high health. That is one criticism of Tank Cat, I suppose. There are cats out there with the survivability ability, which basically give it a chance to survive a shot, regardless of the damage output, which is pretty cool and pretty useful, but most of the units that have that are at a fairly high cost, so it's not always feasible to just spam them out, even if you can get your cat research up to a level where that is possible. In terms of pros, he's a very short cooldown, once again easy to get into that 2-second cooldown mark, fairly high health, certainly for his cost, and very just low cost in general. In terms of cons, low movement speed, which might not be as big of a deal as you might think. However, if you're not very good at stacking, or you're just new to a stage and time things wrong, it can kind of be a pain. Low DPS, which isn't a huge issue. Once again, those meat shield cats, you don't really want them to have a high DPS in most cases. And I'll talk about that now as part of kind of best practices regarding a racer cat. Now let's move along and talk about some strategy actually. It might be worth noting that Tank Cat's cost for Chapter 1 is 100, Chapter 2 150, and Chapter 3 200, so he remains a fairly low cost unit throughout the game. So he is slow, but he is very cheap. So the general idea of what you want to do with this guy is you want to send out as many of them as possible, and then kind of get to a point where you have a decent enough wall of them, and then you want to start alternating with your heavy hitter kind of glass cannon units, for lack of a better term. And this is a technique known as stacking. And what will happen is as the heavy hitters from behind start kind of chipping away at the sheer massive amount of enemies that the eraser or tank cats have been holding off, you'll start to gain ground. And usually by the time you get to the base, you wipe it out super quick. Stacking is one of those techniques and strategies that is useful at every point in the game, and that is what keeps Tank Cat and his Crazed counterpart, once you get it, particularly relevant. I do think there are a few people that are using Eraser Cat wrong, perhaps just out of habit, but their misuse of him stems simply from the slot he is in. I will see a lot of newer players putting Eraser Cat and his Crazed counterpart into your kind of number one row, which isn't generally what you want. There are better cat combos to take advantage of, and Eraser Cat doesn't really have a lot of good cat combos. So although it sucks to see the unit that has been in your slot 1 in some cases, or at least in my case, kind of disappear and take a step back, it is worth it in terms of improving overall efficiency. That being said, at the end of the day, this is a mobile game with two-dimensional cats. I know for a fact most of the people listening to this will not even make it to Uncanny Legends, and that's fine. It kind of gets there are a lot of grindy points in this game. If you know what you're doing, those grindy bits can be more manageable, or in some cases avoided entirely, but it does discourage a lot of people, and proper utilization of every possible asset you have going for you will make that a lot easier, or at the very least not as painful. Now let's take a look at kind of some of the more nuanced mechanics of Eraser Cat. Starting out, let's talk about Eraser Cat's cat combos. They are not great. So, much like our last video, he has access to Cat Army, which is Worker Cat start level up, which gives Worker Cat a +1 initial level. In the early game, this can help. Towards the middle and end game, it is useless. Take a Bow is his only other cat combo. Knockback effect up, and knockback distance is increased by 10%. And this cat combination requires Tank Cat and Kubalan Pasalan, as I believe he's called. I freaking hate the Luga's naming conventions. I am 100% sure everyone pronounces them wrong. But in any case, those are his only 2 cat combos. And I've alluded to this earlier, neither of these are great. Knockback distance isn't generally something that you care for, and even if it is, there are better ways of getting it than having Tank Cat in your first slot. There are just significantly better cat combos out there that we will discuss at a future date. Now let's go over some of the more technical information regarding Tank Cat. And by go over, I mean I'm just going to show you guys the graphs, in all honesty. There's not a ton of commentary for me to provide over these. Just notice the substantial health gain from Wallcat to Eraser Cat. That substantial gain in health is part of the reason you actually really want to prioritize getting this cat to its true form. I understand that farming the cat's capsules is out of your control for the most part and kind of grindy in general, but just know it is important to get this guy to a high level. Really, depending on your RNG, it may actually be 1000% necessary to get him to true form relatively quick if you actually want to proceed in the game at all. Barring a few levels, meat shielding is a core component of this game, and if you're not doing it, power creep will eat you alive before you even really get started. I'm going to flash each of these graphs for a little bit here. While I'm doing that, I will share some Battle Cats trivia about Tank Cat with you. In the Taiwanese version of the game, Eraser Cat does not have Neko on its wrapper. This is also the same for its Manic Eraser Cat counterpart, funny enough. I'm not too sure why this is. More than likely it's due to some form of advertising law in Taiwan, but I can't say I'm 100% certain, so if you do know, feel free to let me know down in the comments section. Tank Cat is the only normal cat that has a mouth similar to those of the Crazed cats. This is interesting, but I'm not too sure it was an intentional design choice. I feel like the Crazed cats were really just copied assets and then modified from there, so I suppose it does make sense. I also really don't like the way that this is worded because Tank Cat was here first, right? So if anything, the Crazed cats copy. I don't know, whatever. Eraser Cat is one of two true forms of normal cats that does not have its HP doubled from the evolved form, the other being Dragon Cat. I believe this is largely just because its HP is already so substantial in its evolved form that just doubling it outright might make it a little bit too good. Before version 4.2.0 of Nico Diluso, Tank Cat was one of the cats that had the shortest range along with Sumo Cat. The shortest range now belongs to Wafer Cat, Little Tank Cat, and Lil Clops Cat Egg with only 100 range. Interesting. Eraser Cat's logo, Neko, is most likely a reference to the eraser company in Japan, Mono, while having the word for cat instead. That's actually pretty clever. The really good little trademark defense stated in Eraser Cat's description may be a reference to the American school supplies manufacturer Really Good Stuff. And finally, in the Battle Cats Unite, Tank Cat and Eraser Cat have different descriptions, with Tank Cat being regarded as female and Eraser Cat only being strong enough to move a small rock instead of two. Very interesting as well. I can't say I ever played Cats or Battle Cats Unite. Now that we are reaching the end of our time together for today, I do want to thank you for watching from the bottom of my heart. In addition to that, if you wouldn't mind liking and subscribing to gain Cat God's blessing on your next gacha roll, I would really appreciate that as well. And to be completely honest with you guys, I am planning on making a few changes to the format in which I present these videos. I've just been rewatching them a few times, and I think there are some opportunities for me to certainly improve. But it'll likely be a gradual process as I try things out on my end and then ultimately see how satisfied I am with them there before I expose any of you to them. That being said, I have the rough scripting laid out for really the remainder of the normal cats. Tank Cat was really one of the only ones I was stressing over, simply because, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, I know this is likely to be one of my more viewed videos. Just if you're looking at cats' popularities, Tank Cat rather reigns fairly supreme for the most part. I find a lot of the advice I gave is fairly general, so if you have any specific advice, perhaps at certain stages or certain stories you have to tell about Tank Cat, feel free to put them down beneath in the comment section and offer any criticism towards the videos as well. I certainly appreciate it, but without further ado, I'm going to hopefully get some sleep and start editing this, or maybe in the reverse order. We'll see. Thank you so much again. I hope you all have a great day, and until next time.